The lake house sat on the far edge of Hollow Pines, Michigan, hidden behind miles of narrow roads and overgrown trails. It belonged to Eric's grandparents, but nobody in the family had visited in over a decade. The place had been locked up, left to rot beside the still, black waters of Ashwood Lake. When Eric invited 3 of his college friends, Ryan, Chloe, and Mia, for a weekend getaway, they expected bonfires, beers, and quiet nights by the water. By the time they arrived, the sun was dipping behind the tree line, painting the lake an oily, metallic gray. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew. The house itself stood crooked and tired, its chipped siding darkened by moss, its windows reflecting nothing but the encroaching darkness. Inside, the floorboards creaked under every step, and the walls carried the stale, heavy scent of dust and forgotten summers. It wasn't long before Ryan discovered the hidden compartment beneath the living room floorboards. At first, they thought it was just an old storage space, but inside lay a faded wooden box sealed with brittle rope. The box contained a single object, a Ouija board, cracked with age, but perfectly intact. Its letters were hand-painted in deep, glossy black, the wood scorched slightly around the edges, as if it had been too close to fire at some point. They weren't planning on using it, but Eric insisted it would be harmless fun. Chloe laughed it off. Mia hesitated, and Ryan, the skeptic, said it was just a game. That night, the 4 of them sat cross-legged on the dusty living room floor. Candles scattered around the board, the lake's dark surface just visible through the fogged windows. The house was silent, save for the faint rustling of trees outside. At first, nothing happened. Their fingers rested lightly on the planchette, and the silence stretched long enough for Ryan to mock the whole thing. But then, almost imperceptibly, the wooden heart began to slide across the surface. None of them admitted to pushing it, though each accused the other in nervous whispers. The first letters it spelled were random, nonsense at first glance, until the planchette slowly spelled a name. The name belonged to someone none of them had mentioned all weekend. It was Liam. Liam had been Eric's childhood friend, the boy he used to spend summers with at this very lake house, until 10 years ago. When Liam drowned in Ashwood Lake, no one ever found his body. Chloe laughed awkwardly, insisting it was a coincidence. But Eric's hands had grown clammy, his breathing unsteady. The next question they asked went unanswered for several seconds. Then the planchette scraped across the board, slowly spelling out 3 words: I am here. Mia tried to brush it off, but the candles flickered violently, and for a moment, the shadows on the walls seemed to ripple, as though something unseen had moved past them. Eric's unease deepened when the planchette began to drag itself without any hands on it. It jerked, scraped, and slammed violently against the letters until it spelled out another message: look outside. Ryan, half convinced that Eric was pulling some kind of prank, stormed toward the window to prove there was nothing there. But when he glanced out into the foggy darkness, he froze. On the dock below, silhouetted against the pale reflection of the moon, stood a figure. Its body was gaunt and dripping, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, hair plastered wet against its face. Even from a distance, Ryan could make out the pale, gray skin stretched too tight across its bones. He backed away slowly, refusing to describe what he saw, but Eric didn't need him to, because deep down, he already knew. They blew out the candles, shoved the board back into the box, and locked it beneath the floorboards again, swearing they wouldn't touch it for the rest of the trip. But the air inside the lake house had shifted. The silence no longer felt still. It felt watchful. That night, sleep refused to come. The wind outside howled softly through the trees, rattling loose shingles on the roof. At some point past midnight, Eric woke to the sound of soft splashing just beyond the bedroom window. Against his better judgment, he approached, peering through the glass. Down by the lake, the figure was closer now, standing knee-deep in the water. It didn't move, but its head slowly turned, as though it sensed him watching. Eric backed away, heart pounding. When he woke the others, they realized something worse. The Ouija board was no longer under the floorboards. The box was empty. By dawn, Chloe wanted to leave. Mia agreed, but Ryan insisted they'd come all this way and shouldn't ruin the trip over a prank, okay? They argued until Eric pointed out something none of them had noticed yet. Wet footprints leading from the dock to the house and stopping right outside the living room. That was when Mia screamed. The Ouija board had returned, but it was sitting in the center of the rug, perfectly dry, the planchette resting over the word yes. Eric wanted to burn it, but Ryan insisted on one last attempt to debunk whatever was happening. Reluctantly, they sat around the board again, the sunlight doing little to comfort them. This time, the planchette didn't hesitate. It spelled out a single, chilling sentence. He never left the water. Suddenly, the entire house trembled. The floorboards creaked violently. Glasses toppled from the counter and from outside. A loud splash echoed across the lake, but when they rushed to the window, the dock was empty. They tried to pack and leave, but when Eric opened the front door, the trail that led back to the main road was gone, swallowed by an endless wall of fog. Every attempt to walk further only brought them back to the house, as though the land itself had folded around them. By nightfall, they barricaded the doors. Huddled together in the living room as the sound of wet, dragging footsteps circled the house. The candles flickered violently again, casting wild shadows on the walls. The board moved on its own this time, the planchette sliding in sharp, erratic jerks until it spelled one final message: "Come down to me." From outside, the water churned violently, waves slamming against the dock. One by one, the sounds grew louder. Wet steps across the porch, fingernails scraping against the walls. And finally, a low, hollow knock on the front door. The four friends pressed together, holding their breath. But the knocking stopped. Somewhere deep in the silence, they heard the sound of the planchette sliding across the board on its own, spelling out the last two words before the final candle went out. Too late. When morning came, the lake house was empty. Their bags, their phones, their car, gone. Only the Ouija board remained. The abandoned Ashcroft Mansion sat at the edge of Salem, Massachusetts, a rotting relic of colonial history. Most locals avoided it, whispering about strange lights seen in the windows and voices that carried on nights without wind. For decades, the city had fenced it off, but its legends drew in those reckless enough to ignore warnings. Among them was a group of 4 paranormal vloggers: Zane, Brooke, Tyler, and Jess, who ran a small YouTube channel documenting haunted locations. Salem was famous for its witch trial history, and the Ashcroft Mansion was rumored to sit atop one of the oldest burial grounds in the region. The group arrived just before dusk, the sinking sun painting the crumbling house in long, jagged shadows. Its roof sagged inward, the shutters hung loose, and weeds strangled the stone steps leading to the front door. Inside, the air was stale and damp, heavy with the musk of rot and mold. Floorboards groaned beneath each step, and dust floated thickly in the weak glow of their flashlights. Tyler carried the gear bag. Brooke set up cameras. Jess managed the EVP recorder. And Zane, always the risk-taker, pulled out the night's main attraction, an antique Ouija board they'd bought from a local shop that claimed it once belonged to a Salem medium who mysteriously vanished in 1872. They chose the second-floor master bedroom for the session, believing it had the strongest energy. The room was littered with old furniture draped in torn white sheets, and a massive cracked mirror leaned crookedly against the far wall. Aside, the last traces of daylight were swallowed by fog creeping up from the woods below. The 4 of them sat cross-legged in a circle around the board, placing their fingers lightly on the planchette. At first, nothing happened. Minutes passed in silence, except for the faint hum of the EVP recorder. Then, as Zane asked the first question, the wooden heart began to slide slowly across the board. None of them admitted to moving it, but it glided with unsettling precision, spelling out one name: Maribel. Brooke immediately recognized it. During her research, she had discovered that Maribel Ashcroft, the mansion's last known resident, had been accused of witchcraft during the Salem trials. But before she could be tried, she vanished without a trace. They asked if Maribel was still in the house. The planchette drifted toward yes. The second question was about what happened to her. After a long pause, the board spelled out burned, but not gone. Jess shuddered and whispered that the EVP recorder was picking up faint murmuring, a woman's voice layered beneath static, repeating words they couldn't make out. Then, without warning, the planchette spelled something none of them expected. Stop. The group hesitated, unsure if it was a warning or a trick. Tyler wanted to quit, but Zane, caught up in the thrill, kept pushing for more answers. The next question he asked triggered the strangest response of the night. The board slowly spelled, "Don't look behind you." Jess froze, refusing to turn around. Brooke's breathing grew shallow, convinced this was someone's idea of a joke. But then she noticed Tyler's hands trembling violently on the planchette. His flashlight, resting on the floor beside him, illuminated the cracked mirror across the room. And in its reflection, there was someone standing behind them. Tyler shut his eyes and insisted it was a trick of the light, but the figure didn't move. Stood in the farthest corner of the room, just outside the circle of their candles. A dark silhouette with shoulders hunched unnaturally forward. Its head twitched in short, jerky motions, as though bones cracked beneath the skin with each movement. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure stepped out of the mirror's reach and vanished into the shadows. The planchette suddenly jerked forward on its own, spelling a single, chilling word: run. Zane grabbed the board, convinced he could end the session by breaking it. But before he could, every flashlight in the room died simultaneously. Candles guttered in the sudden darkness, throwing wild, stuttering shadows against the walls. From the hallway outside, soft, deliberate footsteps approached, slow and steady. The group huddled together, their breaths shallow, until the sound stopped right at the bedroom door. The EVP recorder crackled violently, and through the static came a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a ragged, guttural rasp, low and broken. Behind you. Tyler panicked and bolted for the door, but when he flung it open, the hallway beyond had disappeared. Where the staircase should have been, there was nothing but an endless corridor, stretching into absolute blackness. He stepped back, shaking, insisting they needed to get out, but every exit seemed to vanish when they tried to retrace their steps. Rooms they had passed minutes earlier no longer existed. The house wasn't just haunted, it was shifting around them. Then Jess screamed. Everyone turned to see the cracked mirror on the far wall, which now reflected a version of the room that didn't match reality. In the reflection, they weren't sitting on the floor anymore. They were standing, each of them in different corners of the room, and between them stood the dark, twitching figure. Closer now, its pale face hidden by stringy black hair. But when they looked back at the actual room, there was nothing there. The Ouija board moved again, violently this time, the planchette jerking across the surface until it spelled one final sentence. "She is behind you." Brooke, trembling, finally turned her head, despite every instinct screaming at her not to. And that was when she saw it, just inches away, a pale, eyeless face stretched into an impossible grin, its jaw hanging open far wider than it should have. The candles extinguished instantly, plunging the room into absolute blackness. When light returned, Jess and Tyler were standing alone in the master bedroom. The Ouija board lay splintered on the floor. Zane and Brooke were gone. They searched the mansion for hours, screaming their names, tearing through every locked room and dusty hallway, but there was no sign of them. Not even footprints. Weeks later, Tyler reviewed the footage from that night, frame by frame. In the very last recording, just before the blackout, there was a clear reflection in the cracked mirror. of figures, not two, standing silently in the room. Brooke and Zane were there, but neither of them had faces. The rain came down hard on the small town of Raven Hollow, Pennsylvania, that night. The streets were empty, the air cold and damp, and thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Inside an old Victorian house at the edge of town, 4 college friends had gathered for what was supposed to be just another spooky game night. Eli, Sarah, Mark, and Hannah had been inseparable since freshman year, always chasing adrenaline highs together. Abandoned buildings, ghost tours, urban legends. This time, it was Hannah's idea. She had found an antique Ouija board at a flea market, carved from dark cedar, with symbols etched around its edges, unlike any Eli had seen before. The shopkeeper warned her not to use it, insisting it didn't work like the others. But Hannah had laughed it off, believing it was nothing more than a collector's item. They sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a single lamp casting faint yellow light as rain lashed against the windows. The air felt unusually heavy, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The board was set between them, the planchette resting in the center. Mark joked about summoning demons, while Sarah rolled her eyes, but Eli couldn't shake the unease crawling under his skin. At first, it felt like any other Ouija session. They asked harmless questions, if anyone was there, if a spirit wanted to speak, and the planchette barely moved. Then, without warning, it slid sharply to yes. Everyone laughed nervously, assuming Hannah was doing it. She swore she wasn't. They asked for a name, and the board slowly spelled Daemon. Sarah frowned, whispering that it was Latin for demon, but Mark brushed it off as coincidence. Then the planchette spelled something stranger. I am your guide. Eli felt his chest tighten. He wanted to stop, but Hannah insisted they keep going, saying maybe it was just messing with them. He asked the next question, something he would regret for the rest of his life. He wanted to know how he was going to die. At first, the board didn't move. Then, slowly, deliberately, the planchette spelled Dontask. Mark smirked, thinking one of them was trying to spook the group, but Eli insisted on knowing. He pushed them to ask again, his fingers trembling on the edge of the planchette. That was when the board gave its answer, Burriedale. The laughter stopped. None of them spoke. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, pounding against the glass like frantic fists. Then the lights in the house flickered, once, twice, and went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Hannah scrambled for her phone flashlight, but before she could turn it on, they all heard it. A soft, deliberate scraping sound coming from directly beneath the floorboards. It was slow, rhythmic, like nails dragging across wood. Mark tried to convince everyone it was just the pipes, but the sound grew louder, closer, until they could feel faint vibrations beneath their knees. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When the lights came back, the planchette was no longer in the center of the board. It rested over a single letter E. Eli felt cold wash over him. He asked why the board was pointing at him, but no one had an answer. Hannah, trying to lighten the mood, suggested they close the session. But when she attempted to move the planchette to goodbye, it wouldn't budge. Sarah whispered that something felt wrong, that once you asked the board about death, it claimed you. Then the planchette began moving violently on its own, sliding from letter to letter, so fast none of them could keep up. Sarah frantically scribbled each letter down, and when she looked at the paper, her face went pale. It spelled under you. Everyone froze, realizing the sound they'd heard earlier had been directly beneath Eli's spot. Mark lifted the rug to prove there was nothing there, revealing the old wooden floorboards underneath. But one of them was different, a single plank, darker than the rest, carved with faint, strange markings. Hannah leaned closer and swore she could feel cold air seeping through its edges. Suddenly, the board spelled another word, this time violently jerking the planchette toward each letter with force. Teague. Mark said it had to be some kind of prank, but Eli felt something deeper, an instinctive, knowing dread clawing at his stomach. Against his better judgment, he pried the loose floorboard up, revealing a dark, narrow cavity beneath the house. The smell hit them first, a thick, sour stench of decay. Hannah gagged, covering her mouth. Sarah shined her phone flashlight into the gap, and for a moment, none of them understood what they were seeing. Inside the crawl space lay a rotting coffin. It was small, old, the wood warped and blackened by moisture. On the lid, carved crudely into the splintered surface, was a single name scratched deep into the wood, Eli's full name. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, insisting someone had set this up, but Hannah and Sarah swore they'd never even been in this house before. Before they could process it, the board moved again, slowly spelling one last message. She is already here. At that exact moment, the EVP recorder on Sarah's phone crackled, picking up a low, distorted breathing that none of them recognized. And then, faintly, a whisper emerged beneath the static, repeating Eli's name over and over. The lights flickered violently, shadows rippling unnaturally across the walls. Okay. Then, something knocked from inside the coffin. 3 slow, deliberate thuds that shook the floor. Eli dropped the floorboard back into place and bolted for the door. But when they tried to leave the house, the front door wouldn't open. Neither would the windows. It was as if the entire house had sealed itself shut. In the dark, the Ouija board moved one last time, spelling a final, chilling sentence. She will bury you alive. The lights went out, plunging them into silence, and power returned an hour later. Only Hannah and Sarah were sitting in the living room. Eli and Mark were gone. Police searched the house, the crawl space, and the surrounding woods for days. There was no trace of them. But when officers lifted the warped coffin out from beneath the house, they discovered fresh soil inside and 2 sets of fingerprints clawed deep into the underside of the lid.